Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for everybody to be let in. But if you don't mind, as we usually do, throwing kind of where you're calling in from or joining us from in the chat, that would be awesome. I think we have a pretty big group today, coming from kind of all over the place, which is amazing. We got somebody from Calgary first, to share. Anybody else? Who's coming from outside of Canada? Anybody else? The Netherlands, Dana Point, California. Love it. Anybody else? South Africa. Look at that. We've got good global coverage already. Amazing. Keep the chat coming. Obviously, if you've ever joined us for a webinar, we tried to keep these as fun and interactive as possible. We want your comments. We want you to challenge us to share your perspective, your opinion, especially when we're talking about a topic like sponsorship trends, when nobody has the crystal ball. But we're going to talk a bit about where we see the industry going over the next year, over the next 45 minutes or so. We've got lots of people already joining in, so we're going to get right into it. Just a quick hello. My name's Adam Mitchell. Neil Covant is with us as well. We're both from Sponsor Pulse, as you're probably familiar. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. We've already talked a bit about it. Thank you for joining us. We do these because we get great feedback. We get feedback from you around topics that you're interested in. So we try to keep it really topical, relevant, so that it's useful for your day-to-day. And we also try to, as I said, keep it engaging and light, because it's all about keeping a conversation going and building the sponsorship community together. It is a hot topic. People have perspectives. Please feel free to share them. Just keep it respectful. That's all that we ask. And then, of course, you're going to get access to a recording and to this deck after the webinar today. Really quick highlight of some of the things that we did in 2024. We had a benchmark report that we released that includes over 370 unique sponsorships that we've measured, every brand, every category, every property type, all the benchmarks you need to set up your measurement planning for the next year. They're literally online on sponsorpulse.com for free. Go get them, use them. It's an amazing resource. Valuation, if you're looking at deals or you're wondering what you should be charging for deals, we've got an amazing free resource on sponsorpulse.com that includes the top 50 sport properties across the leagues that you can see there, with investment ranges. This is investment guidance. This isn't asset valuation. It's us providing guidance on what range of investment should you be considering for a top quartile sponsorship of a team. And then we've got lots of data on celebrity. Celebrity and influencer marketing continues to grow. And we've built a model that essentially complements media metrics. So all that is free online for you to use as you build out your strategy. So please take advantage. There's lots of data on there. Obviously, if you want to get your hands dirty and learn how to use it and craft your narratives, amazing, please do so. If you want to work with us or collaborate with us, please reach out anytime. Our team and our success team will be glad to chat with you. But that's enough about that. Let's talk about sponsorship in 2025. I mean, most of you have probably seen this graphic. We went out in kind of early to mid-December with a stream of newsletters and content around some of the themes, some of the different trends that we see unfolding over the next year. We're going to cover some of them in today's conversation. We'd probably need longer to do all of them. But we've got lots of content on all of those themes. So if there's anything that you don't see today, but that you're interested in following up on, please reach out. Before we get into it, though, we wanted to quickly revisit this question that we've been getting a lot over the past 3 to 4 weeks since we've come back from the holiday break. We've heard a lot of people ask, can sponsorship continue to grow? Obviously, we had a pandemic, which was very challenging. We've more or less come out of that. And I think everybody in the industry could probably agree that we've made significant strides in recovering from those pandemic challenges and are in a much healthier state today. There's a lot of excitement, but there's also this question of like, could sponsorship be a bit of a bubble? Could it burst? And I think that's an important thing for us to kind of reflect on before we get into the trends that are shaping the next year. I think it's fair to say for most people that the first 3 to 4 weeks of this year have been quite heavy. Whether it's obviously seeing the awful images and hearing from colleagues in the industry who are living through the terrible fires that have run rampant throughout California, whether it's on this side of the border, our government being essentially a bit at a standstill and not knowing, what is going to come over the next couple of months, whether it be Mark Zuckerberg going out and saying that they're no longer fact checking on Meta platforms, whether it be TikTok, and not knowing really what's going to happen in Canada or in the US with some of the proposed changes to legislation that would prevent them from operating, which is impacting everybody in this industry, whether you're a sports team, a league, a music festival, a charity, whether you're a celebrity or an influencer. These are really important platforms, and there's a lot of change taking place. And of course, we have had, a new president or a returning president who has been inaugurated and obviously has taken a lot of action in the first little while of him joining. And this isn't to be political or to talk about politics, but it's to take us back to that question of, do we think that sponsorship can grow within this climate? The reality is, I feel a little bit like this cat that is trying to hide under a carpet when you think about everything that's going on in the world today. But if you think about the past 3 to 4 weeks, and I'd love for people to share if there is anything that comes top of mind, one of the things that we want to ask you is, where have you felt a bit of reprieve, if at all, or where have you gotten a moment of happiness over the past couple of weeks? And I think that is a really good way to indicate and to highlight just the power of our industry. For me personally, I love tennis, so I witnessed an Aussie Open 33-point rally. Carlos Alcaraz, that smile after winning the point, it was absolutely phenomenal. I forgot about everything else going on at that moment, just enjoying watching that pure athleticism and the enjoyment that he got out of winning that point. I was reminded on Spotify the other day that Mumford is coming out with a new album, and that's one of my favorite bands. Haven't seen them live in forever. I'm like, that gave me a rush. And listening to their new song that I now love and is on repeat. You've got Bryson DeChambeau. Whether you're a fan or not, I wasn't a fan, but he's really turned the tables in a lot of ways and is building some incredible content. He's been trying to shoot a hole-in-one over top of his glass house. There was some news that came out, I think, around him spending over $1 million on his YouTube team and his content team that's producing this content to try to engage and grow the game of golf. I think Joe Pompliano is the one that broke that news in a podcast that he did with Bryson. But like, how fun to be able to just be entertained and to learn more about somebody in the space or in our world of sport and entertainment marketing. You've got Dude Perfect just released, they've released a series of content of their headquarters, and it is worth watching the video. It is absolutely wild to see where this group of creators has kind of grown to in the way that they've engaged consumers and built audiences around the globe. And lastly, on the next slide, you've got, from something that's near and dear to our hearts, Special Olympics has its annual Tim Hortons Donut Day that's coming up in Canada in the next couple of days here. We encourage everybody to participate where, and if you're able, where they're really working together to bring important awareness and funds to this incredible community. But it gives you a moment to kind of pause and reflect and think about the things that give you a bit of happiness and a moment to think about or to maybe get away from the other things that are happening in our world. And I think that's the power of sponsorship. It gives a sense of belonging, allows you to escape and to feel free from some of the things that are happening day to day. And it's all about the experience and the emotions that you feel. And for those reasons, we are incredibly bullish about the industry that we all work in. We do believe that it will continue to grow because these are things that you can't recreate. You can't just build passion for something out of thin air. And I think that's why we believe that this topic of trends and the way that the industry is evolving is such a critical one for us to touch on today. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Neil, who's going to do a lot of the data diving. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, if you have perspectives, please jump in and share them there. I love that people are sharing some of their kind of moments that have given them reprieve and happiness over the past month. Please keep it coming. But with that, I'll throw it to Neil.
All right. Hello, everybody. Adam Mitchell, we practiced the drum roll, but you missed that, so it's okay. We'll go back to
Drum
You're
roll.
supposed to give me a drum roll.
Oh, sure.
You introduced me. Yeah. All right. We're not starting off on a good joke. Well, but here we go. We're going to dive into some of the trends that we've seen in 2025. Some of these might be familiar. Adam spoke about what we did prior to the holidays, where we kind of introduced our 12 themes that we're seeing. So these are going to be those 12 themes, but we're going to start to build those out. So we're going to start with a trend that we've been seeing for a little bit, but the emphasis on this trend continues to climb every year, and we see it becoming even bigger this year, which is both brands and properties as well as agencies really taking an effort to connect with foreign-born and newcomer audiences, both in Canada as well as the United States. Just to let you know, from a data perspective, as we start to dive into a lot of these areas, we're going to kind of bounce from Canada to the United States and then a little bit into North America. So I'll make sure to call that out. All of this data is available for both countries, though, so everybody should know that. So we're going to start in Canada from a new Canadian perspective and just looking at that audience and their receptiveness to sponsorship to begin with. So we know that 1 in 3 foreign-born Canadians and newcomer Canadians have purchased or are impacted by sponsorship, okay, which is significantly higher than is the general population. So there is, with good reason, an ability to leverage sponsorship to connect with these audience. If you look at the trend from an impact perspective that sponsorship has had with new Canadians, it has continued to rise over the past 5 years. So it's reached its all-time high from a sponsorship can drive purchasing and brand equity with foreign-born and new Canadians in 2024. Okay, so that's a starting point for what we're starting to see and why we're starting to talk about this audience as being a critical one as we go forward into 2025 and beyond. When you look at some of the sports properties from a foreign-born fandom perspective and engagement perspective, FIFA all the way at the left, which is the strongest of the properties. These are the top ones in our database. But you look at some of the other properties that are kind of holding their own and strong with outside of FIFA. So things like NBA, NHL, certainly the Olympics, the NFL, and those types of things from a sporting opportunity perspective. A lot of brands have leaned into soccer or football, depending on where you're from, as a means to connect with newcomer Canadians and foreign-born Canadians. But when we look at growing interest, we see a lot of momentum outside of that soccer territory. Okay, and this is all again in Canada with foreign-born Canadians. And you start to see some of the properties that are really starting to rise to the top from a I might not be there today perspective, but I'm starting to get there tomorrow perspective. Okay. Um, the other thing that we look at is, and you're going to see a lot of what we're presenting and a lot of the themes that we're presenting go outside sport because everything that we do is about sponsorship holistically across all verticals and territories. So it's sport, cause, culture, entertainment, lifestyle, etc. When you look from a foreign-born perspective at a lot of the properties that can drive and enhance brand equity amongst the audience that's connected with that property, you start to see a lot happening outside of sport and even outside of FIFA. So as brands start to think through their strategy with connecting with various ethnicities and newborn or new Canadians, you start to see, and you're going to start to see more of a entry into causal territories, an entry into entertainment territories, an entry beyond sport or beyond soccer or even beyond cricket, which we're going to talk about in just a second. So let's go to the battle for North American soccer fans. We're going to segue into soccer. This is another trend that I think we're all pretty familiar with, given the hype of the 2026 FIFA World Cup coming to North America. So what we are starting to see is the competitiveness of that landscape. And we're going to start to talk about what we see happening as a result of that competition, both at a property and league perspective, and also at a brand and sponsorship perspective. We are now in the United States, so we've hopped over the border and we're talking to Americans now, 13 to 64, and we're looking at various soccer properties in the United States with consumers. And you can see it's in the millions. It's led and driven by FIFA and the FIFA World Cup, but all the way through and all the way down into more international league territory. So beyond the organization or beyond the event. You see La Liga, you see Serie A, Bundesliga is kind of just beside it, but there is a lot of opportunity in soccer, but also a lot of fierce competition. With any competitive environment, when you sit back and step back and look at kind of winners and losers, we're not all going to win. Things are going to start to shake out. So what we did is looked at what's happening in the landscape of soccer, um, again, with tournaments and organizations, but all the way down to league levels and international leagues specifically. And not all are winning and not all are gaining momentum. So you see on the left, the ones that are, FIFA World Cup is driving that. FIFA Women's World Cup is just behind it. We're going to talk about that in just a second as well. But you start to get into a lot of those kind of territories of international leagues, and they are starting to lose a little bit of steam in favor of, FIFA World Cup and and even Major League Soccer. All this to say is we know the hype and momentum is beyond soccer, but the competition is going to continue to be fierce, and it's going to struggle to break through from a property perspective across the board.
Just quickly, Neil, I think a couple things that we think are really interesting because we have this conversation often as it pertains to MLS is, MLS has had a lot change, obviously, with Apple coming in. Yes, the Messi effect. There's a lot of noise out there around just how massively that's changed the environment for MLS. We're not suggesting that it hasn't changed massively the business side of MLS or the commercial side of MLS or of Inter Miami. But it is interesting to see because from an engagement perspective, and I think we just got a great question around what constitute engagement. There are essentially 7 key drivers that we look at when we survey consumers. We ask consumers whether they've watched it on TV, watched it online, follow it socially, followed in the news, whether they've recommended it to others, whether they've bought merch, whether they've played fantasy or bet on it. And so we take anybody who has taken at least one of those actions over the past 12 months, we count them once. If you've done all of those things, many times we still only count you once, and that's how we get the size of the prize or what we call engagement. But I think it is important to note that it's not that easy to grow. Even with all the noise, all the positive factors that have influenced MLS over the past couple of years, it's not that easy to just engage more fans. And some of these other leagues, like Premier League, who obviously had their spot run in fall, I believe, really around a rally cry for Premier League fans out of the US. It's competitive, and I think that those leagues are going to continue to come, obviously stateside, and try to engage fans and connect with those audiences to compete with the rest of this table and with obviously everything else that's going on in the world of sport and entertainment.
All right. And it was a good question about engagement, and I'll slow down a little bit on the metrics just to explain that. But for all intents and purposes, when we do speak to engagement, we're really speaking to fandom as we define fandom as behaviorally based. So it's not somebody who's just going to raise their hand and say, "Yeah, I think I'm a fan of National Women's Soccer League." If you followed the National Women's Soccer League behaviorally, we're considering you a fan. If you haven't, we're not. Um, so then we kind of shift focus from the league and the property and the organization perspective into the sponsorship landscape of things as it relates to soccer and spotlighting FIFA, the 2026 specifically, World Cup. So what we look at is what is the opportunity and is there opportunity from a category perspective? And the answer, I think, as most of you would expect, is certainly there is. Soccer, again, as a whole, growing in momentum. It continues to grow, not in all areas, but certainly at a FIFA level, it is growing. And across the board, when you look at opportunity for sponsors and brands to impact consumers as a result of a sponsorship, it varies from the rum category to moving companies to people who can influence software decisions and software companies all the way through. So there is a tremendous amount of opportunity across a variety of categories and industries by way of associating with soccer and certainly with FIFA as 2026 continues to come. But we do also, again, have to keep in mind the competitive landscape of things with brands that are currently invested in soccer. So this could be at a US team level or at a FIFA level. And then you see an arrow kind of pointing that way on the chart. What is really pointing to is 300 other brands that are much lower than those ones that you see on the screen here. So while the hype is there and the momentum is there, it's not going to be there from a driving revenue, driving impact perspective for everybody. We need to do the right things, invest in the right ways, and come in authentically as it relates to our brand and our category. So that's a little bit of a heads up from a soccer perspective and where we see that competitive landscape going. It's going to grow. It's going to continue to grow. It's going to be as big as it's going to get in North America, but that all doesn't equal it's the right idea and way for me. So we're going to keep an eye on who's winning and who's not from a soccer perspective. Into cricket. Everybody excited for cricket in Canada? We're going to speak to in Canada, but the storyline is the same for the United States. Currently, general population wise, nationally representative in Canada, cricket is niche, but probably bigger than many would think. So currently, cricket's reaching 4 million fans. Again, those people who have engaged or followed cricket in the past year. It's at 17%. So if you remember some of the numbers earlier, that's much lower than some of those numbers, but still sizable. When you look at cricket and fans of cricket, even though it's a niche or niche, a little bit more niche fan base, they are a very intrinsic and loyal following fan base. They don't just follow one element or vertical of cricket. They follow and engage across the board with everything cricket related, which is again an opportunity for brands associating with cricket to intercept fans across many different touch points and many different verticals. Okay, and really connect and tap in on that passion point even if and though it is niche, it is growing significantly. It's grown from 15% engagement in 2015 all the way to 22% in 2024. Okay. But again, much like soccer, much like the talk track that we just talked about with FIFA and the competitive environment of things and what that can mean, for those in industry with an ear to the ground, we saw a pretty big tidal wave of brands and partners coming into the cricket space just last year. So of the brands you see here, I think 5 or 6 of them are new as of 2024, and that brand list continues to grow. But again, we're all fighting for, that share of wallet in that same consumer. It doesn't matter if you're a bank, or if you're a soft drink company, we're fighting for that same consumer. And as more brands start to enter, it's going to continue to get a little bit tougher for brands to really break through and resonate. The other thing that we kind of challenge with cricket, and we're not saying cricket's not going to continue to grow, but we are cautious about talking about how much it's going to grow by bringing realities of situations in. So another reality is, we talked about cricket being niche and it is growing, but there are a lot of other properties that are growing as well, many of them with similar targets and audiences as cricket have as well. FIFA being one of them, as FIFA again starts to come in and many brands are investing in FIFA to connect with certain audiences, they might be taking away from cricket, or cricket might be losing a little bit of that opportunity. Boxing is on fire, probably no surprise. We've talked about this before. I forgot which of the Paul brothers, is it Jake or is it the other one? Whatever. One of them is love him or hate him. He's bringing a fan base into the sport. I personally don't love him, but boxing is another one that again we're keeping an eye on. Esports has grown since 2019. It's flattened over the past 2 years, still ahead of cricket, and then rugby. For those of you who were in our last webinar, which is the global webinar that we did, one of the properties that we talked about is growing fastest globally is rugby as well. So rugby is really, we think, going to take cricket on from a sponsorship investment perspective. And I see, Mitchell, you
Yeah, we've
have
got
your
some good we've
off
got some
mute.
good questions that are popping up. I'm going to try to knock them off one by one. So the first question was what about hockey NHL in Canada? Does it continue to grow or is it about flat? You can check all this out on our platform, but over the past several years, it is about flat. There's a couple points. It's grown a couple points since last year, so we're at 61% engagement. So to give you kind of like the general kind of how high is high, how low is low. If you're comparing hockey to cricket, we just said 17% engagement for cricket, 61% for hockey. Hockey, NHL in Canada is the number one property. So that hopefully gives you some context. It is generally speaking flat. We certainly see peaks during the playoffs. So that's something to
Mitchell,
note.
sorry, one thing is on the earlier slide, though, we did see hockey in the NHL is growing with that foreign-born audience from a momentum and interest perspective, and it's amongst the top growers. It isn't growing to the extent that FIFA is from a momentum perspective, but we do see growth in various areas with the NHL, with hockey, with those more traditional kind of pinnacle properties.
Yeah. The other comment that we got was, isn't there a huge sponsorship cost difference between FIFA and cricket, which I think is a very
We're going to
relevant
talk about
topic.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Neil's gonna get
That,
there.
so yes, there is, and bigger isn't always better, as we talked about. What is interesting is though, clutter is clutter. Difficulty to break through is difficulty to break through. So, you could be spending less against a very intrinsic audience, and from a return on investment, that could be worth your while. But again, as other brands start to do the same, your dollar, even though it's less than you were spending on FIFA, is still fighting for their or against their dollar. But we are going to enter that conversation into this talk track. Go ahead, Adam.
One last comment that we got, our question was, what do you think about the esports decline flatline? I think that, like, frankly, our perspective is that like esports and particularly gaming as like a territory has massive global potential, passion. We know that, we see that in markets like China and Germany, like esports and gaming or certain titles are bigger than major sports leagues, right? So we know and we are believers, the data certainly supports that. I think the professional esports has been a bit of a challenge in certain markets as it obviously is evolving and kind of maturing through its life stages. And I think that that's caused obviously a little bit of a whiplash from what usually happens is there's a ton of pump. It's obviously the big new thing and brands want to get in and they want to get in early. And then there's a bit of like this whiplash and kind of the leash being pulled back to say, okay, well, are we getting the value? Are we not? How big is the audience truly going to get? But there's no question that gaming is an amazing territory for brands to activate and to think about getting involved in. And Ed, I think you made a good point. Esports and gaming are very different. Totally agree. That's why we try to really focus on gaming as kind of like it's a massive territory that people are, very passionate about. Esports is very different by market. The US is slightly ahead of Canada. Germany or China would be way ahead of the US and Canada. So it really is market dependent, demographic dependent as well. But great question, and certainly something that we're keeping a close eye on.
All right. At least we know everybody's awake. This is great. Keep them coming. We like the conversation. Otherwise, I'm just looking at my freshly shaven face on the screen. Let's now talk a little bit about women's sport and the growth of and commercial commitment in women's sport. I think for again anybody, whether you're in industry or not, we've seen professional women's sport or even amateur women's sport grow, and for good reason. And it is about time. What's happening, and if you were in again that global webinar that we're seeing, is we're starting to see a new wave of sports fans globally as well. So in that last presentation, we talked about 254 million people globally starting to become sports fans when they weren't already. And when you look at who's driving that momentum and who's driving those increases, it's more women than men. So from an over-index perspective, more women are starting to become fans of sport overall. And there is a kind of correlation with the successes of women's professional sports and sports leagues globally. When we speak in and to the United States specifically, we're seeing a lot of the women's professional leagues really starting to rival that of the men's. So sizable opportunities, in most instances, not yet as large as their counterparts from a male perspective, but there certainly is that rivalry. So you see and look at the difference between FIFA Women's World Cup from an engagement, which reminding everybody is a fandom perspective, And it's close, 41-37. You look at Major League Soccer versus National Women's Soccer League, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to read through all of them, but the storyline and talk track is that they're starting to close that gap. It's not closed yet, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, but it is starting to close. So the inevitable next question is, okay, what does that mean for brands and sponsors? So is there a difference between sponsoring brands from an impact perspective with a men's professional league versus a women's? So we had the luxury of being able to measure both of the past FIFA World Cup tournaments, both men's and women's, and we looked at brands that were involved with both. From an awareness with fan perspective, they were pretty similar and on track. A little bit more for men's awareness than women's. But when you look at the bottom line, so amongst those aware, were each of these brands able to convert those people into feeling better towards them and enhancing brand equity and driving purchase consideration? And you look in all of these instances across the board through FIFA Women's World Cup and that opportunity, there was a greater impact, sometimes on fewer people and fewer fans, but amongst those relative audiences there was a greater impact. What we see coming with all of this is recognition and continued recognition of the strength of women's professional sports, investing and continuing to invest in women's professional sports, but a right sizing of investment. There still does have to be a mindfulness that the opportunities from a number of people perspective, while growing, aren't necessarily apples to apples just yet. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but investments should reflect the currency of a consumer. So you look at, again, I'm not going to read through all of these numbers, but in a number of people perspective, the differences between men's and women's World Cup versus MLS and the National Women's Soccer League, which is a little bit more on par. So we're going to start to see a right sizing of investments in kind of challenging that. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, I think this is a really simple way to look at what is the cost per person that you could reach or that you could impact. And when you look at the way that we look at least providing investment guidance is rooted in the number of people that you can reach and that you can impact, because it really simplifies the way in the conversation of what are we investing? And if it's a cost per fan or a cost per person who is engaged, it makes it really easy to compare these things apples to apples and to see where you can get the greatest bang for your buck. We did get another great question around, do we track unaided awareness? Absolutely, we do. Unaided awareness is one of the, if not the toughest metric to deliver on. You've got endemic brands that have been involved in sport, like a Nike or an Adidas for, decades and decades and decades. They would be, at times hovering around like a 20% unaided awareness mark. The vast majority of brands really struggle to break through even after making an investment. So it is something that we track, and the highest of highs would be somewhere around 20%, give or take, with a lot of brands who are still investing significantly, probably hovering closer to that 3 to 5% mark, and many who are kind of limping in or who are kind of involved and activating probably more on the grounds of these events, really kind of at that 0 to 1 to 2% range.
Yeah, and if the question also is trying to lean into what was the difference between the two FIFAs that you talked to, the results were pretty close and even when it came to both aided awareness and unaided awareness recognition. As Adam's speaking to, a lot of that driven by, the bigger brands doing or spending more, some of the smaller investors starting to really break through. Okay, as mentioned, most of what we've just talked about has been sport. We started to enter into other territories, but only very casually. Now let's take a little bit more of a commitment into venturing into areas outside of sports, starting with charitable sponsorships, which are on the rise, and from what we see and think are going to continue to be on the rise. Again, not without challenges, which we'll speak to. This is now looking at North America wide, so both Canada and the United States. And we know that 51% of North American consumers have purchased as a result of a causal association in the past 12 months. That number again has grown over the past couple of years and 3 years, certainly from and since the pandemic, more of a purpose or a shift towards purposeful marketing, causal associations, community connectiveness, and those types of things. When you look at size of audiences of many causal territories or specific charity organization versus sport, very few will hold up to sports properties. Here are three. Many of the others are on the other side of this slide or chart where they're not as big as sport properties. So the reach, depending on objectives, isn't there to the extent that it is with many sports organizations. Adam, go ahead.
Do you mind just speaking to how we track this? Because I think one of the questions we often get is like, well, how could you possibly compare the NFL or the MLB to Goodwill or to St.
Oh, I
Jude's?
love it.
Um,
Okay. Yes, a metric question. That's fantastic. So, engagement, when Adam explained it earlier, he was speaking about sports properties, but it's the same, for all intents and purposes, way that we measure causal properties as well, with a couple nuanced differences. So, when Adam mentioned that part of the behavioral kind of scaling that we look to for sports properties are, did you attend the game and did you bet on the game? We certainly don't ask whether or not somebody's betting on a charity, but we do ask whether or not we remove that, and we ask whether or not they volunteered time or volunteered or donated money, um, as well as have you followed digitally, socially, and those types of things. So we try as apples to apples best we can to compare for reach of a causal property versus a sport organization. Make sense? Okay, if it doesn't, somebody chat to say I have no idea what Neil just said, and we will re-explain. When you look again, it's speaking about just what we mentioned earlier, often causal properties and organizations specifically aren't at the level as, some of the larger or even medium-sized sport organizations singularly. But when you look down that funnel amongst that captivated audience of each, and you look at the impact they can have, and in this instance, on brand favorability. So it's not purchase consideration on this slide, it's brand equity. They start to really rival and in many ways surpass other organizations. So going back to that earlier conversation in terms of investment, and I'm not going to spend the same perhaps on a specific charity organization than I would on the NFL. You have fewer people who are reached, but there is an intrinsic audience there who will feel better towards your brand as a result of your association if and when you've done things right and well. But yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Neil. I was going to say there's one question that we got around are we seeing more diversification in sponsorship portfolios for brands to include both properties and charities? And I think it was just relevant to touch on, FedEx St. Jude Championship with the PGA is like an interesting example, not the only one, but an interesting example because it has to do with St. Jude's. And we're talking about St. Jude's here, where you've got sport property, brand, FedEx, and charity all coming together. And obviously the power of that and the way that St. Jude is integrated into their broadcast and the way that they tell that story, I think is a really powerful way of doing that. We've seen it in other sports leagues as well. Hockey Fights Cancer. There's lots of different examples. So I think we will continue to see like the blending and the intersection of passion points to better deliver on where consumers what consumers care about. And we know cause is something that is near and dear to very, very many people that are out there.
Right. So we're not seeing a one or the other. I'm walking away from one to invest in the other. We are seeing more of the integration between the two and baking in those plans of I'm going to bring my partnerships or portfolio together to work harder for me together. And this just speaks to, and I think that it's probably very well known. There's a lot in any territory, but causal, there's hundreds of different verticals and organizations and those types of things. So, as we continue to build out plans toward causal marketing initiatives, we have to remember that not all are going to be the same opportunity for our brand. They're not all going to connect with our brand targets in the same way. So we need to be rigorous on which ones we choose and why we choose those ones. Adam.
Yeah, really quickly, I think one of the things, and I don't really have a full prediction on this. I think something that we're keeping an eye on is I think there was a movement of a lot of brands wanting to like own a charitable territory, so to speak. So, we want to own recycling or freshwater or whatever it may be, and building like a brand-owned program so they can build equity behind that. It's difficult to do, and it's difficult to operationalize and to actually deliver on the mandate. So, I think we've seen kind of a pendulum sort of start to shift back towards looking at charities that have similar values, where there's great target efficiency and alignment, where there's an opportunity to really drive a message home. And I think that we'll probably see that continue to shift that way, just given there's an audience that's built there, right? Some of these charitable organizations have massive audiences domestically around the world. So why not work with the team, the people, the organization that's already out there doing it?
All
Back to
right,
you, Neil.
we're
We're
gonna
almost there.
stay. We're gonna stay. We got a little bit left. We're gonna stay outside, but we'll make it fun and exciting and interactive. And you are all helping us to do that with your questions. So thank you. We're gonna stay outside of sport. We're going to now enter into music, and I think again something that you've started to see more of is from a branding perspective and sponsorship perspective, really activating a music sponsorship beyond just giving away tickets or digitally or socially putting your logo up on a website. Um, you look at people who are saying they're going to concerts and they're going to music festivals. The costs, I think we're all pretty familiar with, of a ticket have gone up pretty insanely in many instances. But more people versus pre-pandemic are starting to go there. And that really, I think, speaks to what Adam was speaking to earlier about the things that give him reprieve and kind of brought him that comfort, happiness, whatever word you want to use for, help me feel better. That's what music, entertainment, lifestyle does. Okay. We also know that amongst people who are going to music events and to festivals, they are a more likely audience to be engaged with sponsorship and impacted by a sponsorship, just naturally and overall. This speaks to the point of activation. I know that at nauseum, you've probably heard us and others in the industry speak about activation. Just briefly, when we do talk about activation, what we're really talking about is going from being static and just presenting your brand to really taking it all the way to the end and having fun with somebody, celebrating with a consumer, celebrating with an attendee, celebrating with a fan, and making their experience better because you were there. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about activation. And you look at the activation specific to music, this question was asked, that will best motivate and drive impact. It isn't again about I'm giving you information about when the show is, where the artist is, those types of things. It really is about that exclusivity, right? Giving me an opportunity to do better, to see more things that other people don't have. You're giving me that experience. And it isn't just about giving me free shit, excuse my language. Um, it's also like just content. Show me footage, those types of things. So we see that as being impactful, and then we start to see the brands that won. We did a music festival study last year, and there was, I think, 60 different brands, whatever that number was. The ones that really resonated to the top, if you look at that blue outline, are ones that brought new things to people that they would not have otherwise experienced. Whether it's new bands that they didn't know about, whether it's an opportunity to see the stage and to see the band at a different level, those types of things are what brands are really starting to do, and that's how they're winning. And this is validated through people who went to festivals and events. I can see chat lighting up, but I haven't seen. Oh, there, you turned off your mute button.
Well,
Talk to me.
we're going back a theme because there were a couple of really good questions around charitable partnerships. One was, do all these charitable properties give some sort of media returns? What exposure do the sponsors get? I think it's a really good question. I think obviously it really depends on the scale of that particular organization. Many of them that we work with, the Special Olympics, WWF, and MS Canada, like they have significant reach through all their channels. So they are the ones that can provide. That's not true for every one of them. I think there's also a number of organizations. If you think of like MS Canada and A&W and their Burgers to Beat MS, it's an incredible partnership, tests phenomenally well with consumers. and is something that they build together and then leverage one another's networks. So I really do think you got to go into it knowing that you're going to have to put a bit more of your reach and your spend into making it happen. But if you look at the actual impact that that has versus other partnerships, like you might be well ahead of it, and you're of course doing good, which is always a bonus. Is there a measurable performance increase when combining different partners into one central activation? Does cause plus sport equal more impact? I think that's a great question, and I think that we should include that in our next webinar because there was another question before around the intersection of passion points. So let us come back to that. We do have some case studies on it, but it'll probably take us down a tangent here.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is it depends, which I know everybody hates to hear, but it really does. But yes, more often than not, when it's the right connection point, they're authentic. And actually, funny enough, we're going to talk a little bit about a connection point right now when we talk about entertainment brands, but almost assume that, rather than talking about entertainment brand and sport, we're talking about causal and sport to answer that particular question. This talks about, I'm going to hurry up a little bit, but the size of entertainment brands, rivaling many of the sports ones, certainly in the Disney and Marvel and Star Wars area. But they also have that bottom of the funnel effect on ability to impact somebody as a result of an association. And brands have taken notice. They've taken notice for a long time. This is not new information, but the reason why they do is everything we're talking about right now, it's an extension of connecting with people on different passion points, right? So if you look at this particular instance and you look at the strength of Marvel, it's much higher with soft drink drinkers overall. So that's a plus for Coke. And it's higher with both Coca-Cola's own drinkers as well as with Pepsi drinkers. So it offers them the ability to not only connect with new audiences or the same audiences on different passion points, it offers them both a retention and acquisition strategy potential. And then you look at properties who are taking notice as well, right? This is just one example of the NFL who brought in Marvel into their own universe, in their, no pun intended, into their own world, because they also know that their fans are not just fans of their product, they're fans of other things as well. So our objective and goal is always to make somebody's time better with us. What better way to do that than to give them what they want and to stop forcing things down like bad refs? Sorry, didn't want to go there. And we're going to continue to see that space grow. Again, I'm just going a little bit quicker now, but this is a cool and good area, and I think one that's pretty top of mind to many, which is the power of celebrity. We've seen it take off, we've seen where it's going, and it's only going to continue to grow. How do we know that? Consumers are asking for it on the left side, and sponsorship professionals like everybody on this call are saying that we're also seeing it grow. We think it's going to continue to grow. We're going to see more of it as time goes on, more of that celebrity and athlete association. So then we look at the difference between and where there's benefit from a athlete or celebrity association. So this case study looks at the team only sponsorship versus having a team sponsorship plus a player on that team. From an awareness perspective, fans were much more aware of the association between the brand and the team than the brand and the athlete. No surprise, there's exceptions to every rule, but you're going to see more of that than anything else. But where the dual kind of both end approach really did start to take off is in impact in both brand equity again and brand purchase consideration and in very specific areas of brand opinion. And that's where, and it has to be the right person doing the right things, but having the right person doing the right things and layering that into your strategy can have that impact. So what is the right person doing the right things mean? It isn't about just seeing somebody on a television commercial or hearing their voice, okay, or seeing them on social media. And frankly, it isn't even as much about the ability to meet that celebrity. What it's really about, and again, this is from asking people, is the authentic connection and way that that celebrity or influencer gets behind the product and brand. People know when somebody's promoting something that they're just like, it's big payday, I'm going to promote it, versus I'm behind this product. I like it, I use it, I'm with you. And that's the difference maker between something working really well through that connection with an influencer or celebrity and something not working as well. We talked about, and Adam talked about, when we look at celebrities and personalities, it isn't just about how many social followers they like, because you can be led astray by just doing that. What we really do and look at is beyond that, is there a connection and passion with people and that celebrity? So this is a fun one, I think. We tested, I think it was about 250 celebrities, personalities, athletes recently in Canada. We score them. This is just an overall score, but we do have metric by metric. In Canada, the ones on the left were the top performing. So number 2 and 3 in overall score, and they're going to work different ways across the metrics, were Dan and Eugene Levy and Wayne Gretzky. Number 1, Ryan Reynolds. He is handsome. Good looking guy. Ryan Reynolds is number 1 in Canada. This is the fun part, and I love it. The second and third lowest performing. Again, sometimes not because they're not well liked, but sometimes because they're not well known. So it all features and factors into the formula, which can be weighted based on your objectives. Are Aaron Ekblad and Brad Gushu. I don't know if I mispronounced that.
You did, but
The
Brad Gushu. But yeah, go on.
Gushu. I was close. It's the end of the webinar almost, so my voice is. Anyways, number 1 for lowest performing is no drum roll. Jake Paul. But again, if you look at which one of these celebrities have the most kind of following on social, and I haven't, Ryan Reynolds will be up there, but Jake Paul's certainly going to be up there. That doesn't mean an association with him is going to work. In fact, it's least likely to work in this from an audience perspective in the way that we've asked things. Lastly, we're not going to dive deep on each one of these because we're running out of time. But if you did receive our newsletters of the top 12, some of what we rounded them up with are sponsorship measurement expanding to employee retention and satisfaction. It isn't just about the fans, right? When a brand and company is sponsoring somebody, you're representing your company and everybody in your company. We are starting to do and see more of those stakeholder type interviews, discussions, and quantitative analysis to make sure that it's not just the target audience that's going to appreciate it, but it's also the people who are working with us and for us. IP rights, media value banks, and right holder premiums under scrutiny. Again, accountability is key. Where the economy is going is key. Things are tighter from a budget perspective than they ever have been. Brands are saying to properties, you want me to spend against something, you have to prove and show me that it's going to directly drive purchasing of my product and help me make more money or enhance my brand equity. And if it isn't, get rid of it. And then the declines of exclusivities, we've seen a lot of that. And then we question and kind of start to look at what does that mean? Certainly from a clutter perspective, as there's more entrants, it's tougher. It's just going to be a tougher environment, which doesn't mean that we can't continue to win, but you got to step up your game in all the ways that we just talked about.
You made
Rush
it.
through the
You
end.
made it.
Hold
Quickly
on,
before
my quick
sorry, go
QR
ahead.
code for those who pretty much all of this data or most of the data is on the platform. For those who'd like to see it, subscribe. Please do your phone on the QR code and enter into our world. At the very least, for no cost, you will receive all of the content that we produce.
Very cool. Thank you, Neil. You nailed it. If anybody has questions, please fire. I did want to call out a couple of things. There were a couple of questions that came through. Somebody very well pointed out that there were the only celebs that were shown in that comparison were male. That was not on purpose. That was just the top and the bottom were male. We do track of all of the hundreds of celebrities. It is a very even split of male female. I also want to call out that in our global race for a fan base last webinar, or actually it was the Paris 2024 Olympic webinar, where we actually showed how powerful female athletes, particularly those from it was Team USA. They were literally outshining several professional male athletes. So we do have some of that data available at the ready, and we'll share that out.
And a free offer for the person who asked that, if there's somebody specifically you'd like to know about, let us know. If we have them in our database, it's yours, and we more than likely do. At no cost.
Yes, exactly. So any other questions? One other thing that I did see, somebody said they were interested in impact on employees, just overall retention. We will revisit that next time around, but we have done a study, we've done several studies on this. Obviously, if you think of a massive organization, tens of thousands of employees, we've quantified the power of sponsorship within that employee base to look at, is it going to attract new employees? Is it going to retain current employees? And obviously the cost of retention is very real. If you have questions or comments or thoughts on that and you want something before the next webinar, let us know. And we'd be happy to chat about it. Otherwise, we're getting a lot of thank yous, which you're welcome. Thank you for joining us. We keep coming back because you guys keep showing up and telling us that you want more, that you want to hear about certain topics. So please let us know if there's anything else that you want us to cover in the next one. We'll probably be back with something in March. But until then, we wish you all the very best in the first quarter of the year. And remember to focus on those happy moments that the world of sport and entertainment and cause give us on the daily. But thank you guys and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.